Hello members, welcome back to the next part of Salem's witch trials. So, with the alleged witches in jail, the condition of most of the afflicted girls temporarily improved, though Anne Putnam Jr. continued to be tormented by two spectres. One was Sarah Good, Sarah Good's 4-year-old daughter apparently, Dorothy, whose ghostly presence bit, pinched, and choked Anne in an attempt to get her to sign the Devil's Book. Anne soon identified another spectral tormentor, Martha Corey, a villager who had become a member of Paris Church in 1690. Soon Martha's spectre was also afflicting Mary Warren, a servant in the household of John Proctor and his third wife, Elizabeth. The Proctors rented the substantial Downing farm, located just south of Salem village boundary, where they also ran a tavern. Anne was not done, however. Next, she accused Rebecca Nurse, an elderly Salem town church member, of the unblemished reputation. Rebecca and her husband, Francis, rented the Townsend Bishop farm in Salem village, which lay just to the west of the Endicott farm. Tituba had said there were 9 witches. Thanks largely to Anne Putnam Jr., 7 of them had been named by the middle of March. Soon their spectres were haunting the other afflicted girls, and also attacking new victims, including adult women and even one man. The Paris's slave, John Indian, and Thomas and Anne Putnam, that was senior, teenage maid, Marcy Lewis, she suffered fits so severe that several men were needed to restrain her. Mercy was in a very dreadful and solemn condition, suffering so much that people feared she could not continue long in this world, unless the torment subsided. Soon Anne Putnam Senior herself was also doing battle with the invisible world, and Bathsheba Pope, a middle-aged Quaker resident of Salem Village, had been temporarily struck blind by apparently Martha Corey's spectre. Sarah Bibber and another woman, probably we think Margaret Goodale, were tormented as well. On March the 21st, magistrates Hawthorne and Corwin examined Corey and heard enough evidence to send her to jail to await trial. At a session 2 days later, they also bound over little Dorothy Good and elderly Rebecca Nurse. Bear in mind, little Dorothy Good was only very young. The Proctor's 20-year-old servant, Mary Warren, was also deeply involved in the proceedings. Early on, she had shown signs of affliction, yet she recovered when John Proctor, a vocal critic of the trials, threatened to thrash her, and then she had no more fits. He told Samuel Sibley that, if left to the devices of the afflicted, we should all be devils and witches quickly. He felt that a trip to the whipping post for the afflicted would end the accusations. Josie Pope heard Proctor say that if Mr. Paris would let him have his Indian, he, the said Proctor, would soon drive the devil out of him. Elizabeth Proctor and Sarah Clyce, the sister of Rebecca Nurse, appeared before a special session of the governor and his council of assistants that met in the Salem town meeting house on April the 11th. Under the Massachusetts Bay, this was like a charter that they set out for certain trials where they'd all meet together. It doesn't have to be a courthouse at this time, bear in mind. It could be a church, it could be a tavern, but it's a general meeting house, and this was from a charter of 1629. As well as the interim government, they were all now in place. The governor and the council of assistants acted as the colony's highest court. The elderly governor, this was Simon Bradstreet, stayed in Boston, but Deputy Governor Thomas Danforth and 4 assistants travelled to Salem. where they were joined by assistants John Hathorne and Jonathan Corwin. The presence of these high-ranking officials indicated that events in Salem had taken on colony-wide significance. Assistant Samuel Sewell came north from Boston for the session, nothing in his diary that it was a very great assembly, and how 'twas awful to see how the afflicted persons were agitated. After listening to testimony, the court ordered Sarah Cloyce and Elizabeth Proctor held over for trial and arrested John Proctor. This was based on accusations made against him in court. Danforth could have brought a halt to the proceedings, or at least slowed them down. Instead, his actions provided the colonial government's tacit approval of the process, causing the accusations to accelerate. Danforth and the assistants returned to their respective homes, surely helping to spread the news of witchcraft throughout the colony. As evidence of Satan's attack spread over the course of the next several days, spectres of people who lived outside of Salem village began to afflict its inhabitants. Until this point, while the afflictions and accusations had grown in number, the accused were all residents of Salem village. There were precedent for such a large outbreak within one New England community. 13 people had been accused of witchcraft in Hartford in 1662 to 63. 4 had been executed. Indeed, up until this time, more witches had been executed in Connecticut than in Massachusetts. So it's not like Massachusetts was known for executing witches. But this was about to change, obviously. On the April 19th, the court examined 4 more suspects: Bridget Bishop, Giles Corey, Abigail Hobbs, and Mary Warren. The husband of Martha Corey Giles was a member of the Salem Town Church. Having left the ranks of the afflicted, Mary Warren was soon accused of witchcraft herself. When brought before the judges, she said that the afflicted persons did but dissemble or find their fits. In response to Mary's accusation, the afflicted immediately began to exhibit severe symptoms. Mary reacted with fits of her own, so she was led away to prison. The next day she confessed that she had signed the devil's book, but only because the proctors had tricked her into doing so. She suffered more fits and accused Giles Corey and others of witchcraft. 14-year-old Abigail Hobbs of Topsfield confessed as well, saying, "I have seen sights and been scared. I have been very wicked. I hope I shall be better, if God will help me." She testified that she had met the devil 4 years earlier in the woods at the Eastward Casca Bay. This would have been the spring of 1688, a few months before the struggle known as King William's War broke out. This conflict, that would rage along the New England frontier until 1697, pitted the English settlers against the Wabanaki, the native peoples of northern New England, and their French allies. The war brought the Hobbs family and a member of the refugees from Maine to Essex County. The afflicted girl, Mercy Lewis, was also a refugee, probably from the settlement of Falmouth. Interesting name that, isn't it? So the girls may have known each other in Maine and may even have been distant relatives. There were 2 of many war refugees who would become involved in these trials. Abigail Hobbs' confession was a turning point in the course of the witch hunt, for her description of meeting the devil in Casca Bay introduced the frontier war into the proceedings. That, of course, set the stage for the arrest of Reverend George Burroughs, former minister of Salem village, as well as Falmouth. The principal settlement of Casco Bay, present-day Portland, Maine now. 2 days later, Ann Putnam Jr. saw his spectre, as well as that of Abigail Hobbs, and testified that Burroughs' apparition tormented her, trying to force her to sign the devil's book. The spectre boasted that he had killed his first two wives and also murdered the wife and child of another former Salem minister. Deodat Lawson. On May 4th, Burroughs was arrested in Wells, Maine. The charges and his arrest caused a sensation, for here was a Puritan minister, a bastion of faith, accused of being a witch. 5 days later in Salem, Hathorne and Corwin examined Burroughs along with Sarah Churchwell, another refugee from Maine, and 3 women from Woburn. All 5 were held when investigated for trial. And that's the next part of our Salem witch trials. I don't want to do them too long because it's going to be a long read, I'm afraid, because the Salem witch trials, they're so, well, in depth, I suppose, because there's just that much to go through when you're looking at the Salem witch trials. It's like looking at the English witch trials. So many people are brought into it by pure accusation alone that it ends up being really far-fetched, really stretched. And let's bear in mind that these people are innocent, okay? They didn't murder anybody or do anything like that. I don't know what it is. I don't know whether they were lying. I don't know if it was over land, money. I don't know if there was something physically wrong with them, like there was probably ergot poisoning, which caused them to have weird things happen to them. I don't know. But I do know these people were not all witches, and they were not dancing with the devil, signing books with Satan or whatever. That wasn't happening, okay? Why this happened, I don't know yet. But hopefully we'll get some answers as we go along. Thank you for listening and many blessings.